increasing government efficiency, that sounds great. I don't disagree with that, right? My idea for increasing government efficiency is to hire more government employees and to support them.
Welcome back to Infrastructure Connections, the podcast where we explore what makes infrastructure work. Brought to you by the Infrastructure Sustainability Council, I'm your host, Seth Scott, and today we'll be speaking to Cailin Slattery. Cailin is an assistant professor of economics at the University of California, Haas School of Business. Working with Yale Law School professor Zachary Liscow and William Nober of Columbia University, she co-authored a paper titled State Capacity in Infrastructure Costs. The data showed that experienced state employees, like engineers, were worth 3 times their salary in cost savings for infrastructure projects. Hi, Cailin. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Seth. Thanks for having me.
So your research is mostly around government spending and private companies. Tell me about what you typically research.
Yeah, so I'm interested in all interactions that state and local governments have with the private sector. So this project that we'll talk about today is about procurement and infrastructure, as well as some projects on how state governments choose regulations and how influenced they are by local lobbying.
So you found that about per 1,000 residents, you should have one additional transport employee, and that'll lower costs by up to 26% on the project level?
We don't see, like, at a granular level how many people worked at a given project or how many hours they spent on it. What we see is in the state how many people are employed in highways in the state government, and we can correlate that with the average costs in that state. And what we see is that states that employ more people per capita have lower project costs. Some of this could just be that people have, if you have more work to do, you're slower at any given project, right? So you just they have a high workload, and so if you have many projects on your desk, the contractor asks you a question about one specific project, you take a little bit longer to get back to them. That leads to higher costs on the ground, right? Like, so small things like that can add up. It also could be a symptom of struggle to hire like qualified engineers, which a lot of states report, and they'll do. I've read many like internal reports commissioned by state DOTs about how they're struggling to fill open positions in state government, partly because they're not offering competitive wages compared to the private sector, partly because, and this I don't have research to back up on, but it seems anecdotally that there are less college graduates coming out with civil engineering degrees. These people are instead studying computer science or something.
Yeah, that was the next point, was that you'd recommended that the higher quality employees actually result in lower project level costs as well. So up in the 75th percentile. How did you calculate that?
We wanted to get at some measure of, how much does any one engineer explain of like how well a project goes. But we have many engineers, and many times we only observe them working on 1 or 2 projects. So it's hard to kind of disentangle what that one person's impact was. So what we use is the fact that they're state employees and they have a very specific pay scale, and we observe what their compensation is. And so we know where they are on their pay scale, basically. And so if you get paid more that means that can mean 3 things, basically. You've been working there for longer, so you're more experienced. You are better at your job, so you've gotten promoted quickly, even like conditional on experience, or you are have become licensed as a professional engineer in the state. So you've gone through like the rigor of this extra professional training and stuff, which not everyone does. And so those engineers that are higher in the pay scale are the ones that are able to reduce costs at the project level. We also know that these engineers are the ones that are assigned to more complicated projects. So it's even more impressive that we find this relationship between quality and cost, right?
Sure. And what does that quality translate into as far as tasks go that are going to impact the bottom line?
Investment and effort in any one phase of the project can influence costs. I can give a couple of examples. So, for example, in design stages, you really need to be very detailed in the design of the project. So, we'll see examples of the project being planned, it's let out to bid. So the contractors see the plans and they say how much it's going to cost them to complete the project. And then generally the lowest bidder will win the project. And then the contractor gets to the ground and they start, let's say it's a resurfacing project, but they have to dig up the existing asphalt. They dig up the existing asphalt, and then there's something right underground that they didn't expect to find, right? When you plan the project, you should know that there's going to be something there, like the sewage line or something that's right there. And so now we have to go back to the government. We have to say, hey, look, this is here. You didn't tell me it was going to be here. My costs are higher because of this. Now you're negotiating with one guy. You're not negotiating with the set of bidders. And so that's, because of the planning of the project, you're leaning to higher costs. Sometimes bidders can see this from at the bidding stage. They look at the plans. They say, these plans aren't very detailed, and that's risk to them. And so they reflect that higher risk and higher bid going in. Even in the bid letting, you can put an effort in increasing like the bidder pool. So in the survey that we did across states, we saw that states that do bidder outreach have lower costs, and that's one thing that the engineers can do. And some engineers have a good reputation. They're people that like the contractors know they're easy to work with or they're good to work with, and they might see that you're the manager of the project and they're more likely to bid on that project. So yeah, I think that it's hard to say what any one engineer is doing right, but there are many small things along the way that you can do. Yeah.
You'd mentioned earlier how it's harder to get new grads or people to go into studying engineering as opposed to other fields. One of the problems we're having in New Zealand is the lack of the pipeline, that we need more people coming into the engineering field in order to gain that experience in the first place, and also to gain experience from more experienced workers. How do you see that playing out through this research?
Not only when experienced engineers are assigned to projects, those projects are lower cost. When the experienced engineers retire, then costs at the district level go up, right? So the whole office, basically, that those projects are coming out with, those costs go up. And so, the retired engineer is replaced by someone, and they probably hired a new engineer, at the entry level position. But you would think there would be like very large benefits to having more overlap between the experienced engineer and the new hires, right? Partly because there are so many rules and regulations in this setting, experience becomes so valuable because you know what to do in any, contingency. And so some of the complaints we hear about the new engineers from the contractors is that, they don't know what to do. And so anytime we have a question or something comes up, they have to go back to the rule book. So they go back to the office and they go through the rule book and they find out whereas the experienced engineer knows exactly what to do. And so there's this interesting interaction between experience and between capacity and regulation, I think, in this setting. But yeah, they say similar things in internal reports the state DOTs do to what you were just saying, that they would like to have more opportunities to train the new engineers. They struggle hiring them. And there's a lot of worry about consultants, reliance on consultants. So if you're understaffed, then you're hiring a consultant from the private sector to do the work. And there's a lot of worry that if they don't hire new entry-level engineers and train them, if they only hire consultants, then in 10, 20 years, there's not going to be anyone to oversee their consultants, right? And so this is a big concern in some states.
One of the things that you showed was how valuable engineers are, but you wanted to put a dollar value on that as well. So the current engineer salary average is about $168,000, and you're arguing that it should be as high as $300,000 a year. I think a lot of engineers are happy to hear that. So can you tell me how you came up with that number and why?
Yeah, so first I will say, so all of the engineer quality analysis that we did was for the state of California. And in the state of California, actually on average, the average public sector wage is pretty similar to the private sector. It's at the top of the distribution where you see the differences. So we compare like a higher quality engineer and see how much they can reduce costs on a given project. Is the number that we've been talking about earlier. So it's something like $300,000 per mile. Then you have to scale that by the average size of a project and also the number of projects the engineer works on per year. Since these are bigger projects that the more experienced engineers work on, they really work on like one project every 2 years. So you end up with something like $750,000 dollars per engineer year. That's the value of a substantial increase in quality. Like you can think of it maybe like 5 to 10 years of experience. And so the point I'm trying to make is just that the state should be more than willing to offer them the private sector wage to retain them and keep them in the public sector instead of the private sector.
So what you're saying is that since they're going to be able to save $750,000 a year through their experience, then it makes sense that the state would pay them up to $300,000 a year, which is what they would be paid in the private sector, in order to keep them in the public sector.
Exactly. Yeah. You that summary was very succinct and not overly complicated. That's exactly it. Yes.
You'd mentioned the use of external consultants. Does the use of external consultants make costs rise?
So we do see that states that cite consultant use as an issue have higher costs. And so you may assume that those states where they're citing consulting use as an issue have are the ones that are maybe overusing consultants, as you said. Again, unfortunately, we do not observe like at the project level, does this project use a consultant? Does this one not? That would be very cool to see. But in the macro aggregate kind of survey level analysis, it does seem consultant use is one of our few like statistically significant cost correlates.
I think that's something that we see here. Government departments tend to be very small, and they don't have as much in-house staff. And as a result, they do rely on external consultants quite a bit. And then as a result, we have very high costs for infrastructure. So I imagine there's some kind of correlation there.
And there's an interesting thing about So there are two things going on with the consultant's cost, I think. One is it may just cost more per hour to pay the consultant than it would in-house. That's not what we're measuring. Again, we're measuring the project cost, which is like the cost you're paying the contractor who's building the project. And so what it means is like the states where they're relying on consultants more actually are having some issues that like in planning the project, for example, that's leading to higher costs. And that could just be a whole host of agency issues where the consultant doesn't know all the institutional details as well as an in-house person would, or doesn't have the exact same incentives as the in-house person does to keep costs low, things like that. So yeah, I think that it can be a real issue.
So it looks like basically the right policy is to hire more public employees and hire the highest quality employees possible and offer them salaries comparable to the private industry, just to keep as much work in-house and keep that pipeline going so that engineers stick around, train the next generation. Is this how governments save money in general on infrastructure projects?
I think our results suggest that's the case. I mean, it's easier said than done. I think if we can make civil engineering cool again, I think that also is could have a sizable impact. Again, I don't want to say that this is the only thing that drives costs in the United States. I think there are other issues with competition and how and perhaps on how projects are designed and like environmental review, as you brought in before, that go into costs that we're not necessarily able to measure in this project. But state capacity is a big piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
I guess big picture, it kind of puts us in a tight spot then, because right now, the governments that we have around the world currently are looking at ways to cut their departments and to lower the number of government employees and to reduce the costs of government projects. And it sounds like what this paper says is that we need to do the opposite. How do we go about convincing taxpayers that those government workers are worth it? And is it really just a trust issue at this point?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Definitely a trust can be a trust issue. Of course, increasing government efficiency, that sounds great. I don't disagree with that, right? I just my idea for increasing government efficiency is to hire more government employees and to support them. And Elon Musk's idea of increasing government efficiency is to fire those people. So, and I think this paper provides some nice evidence that was actually a very bad idea. And so if you're going to have a government that's going to provide public goods, public services for its citizens, right? In order to do that, it needs the capacity to do it well, and the capacity is people who are trained and experienced and compensated for their work.
So do you have any advice for the people who are listening who are working for government agencies or who are engineers currently around how they might advocate for more hiring higher quality or higher salaries, and what can they do from the inside to affect this issue?
The exercise that we do in the paper with the salaries, that's probably the hardest thing to implement in terms of if you're working in the government agency. But I think that, there are a lot of intermediate steps in terms of, more actively recruiting at local schools, things like this, more smooth, like streamlining hiring processes. So there's a lot of bureaucracy in the hiring process that might dissuade. You have an engineer choosing between the public sector job and the private sector job, and the public sector job, they're making the hiring process is very arduous. These are things, kind of relatively small policy changes that might make a difference. Also, starting the hiring process much earlier, so you have this overlap between the entry-level engineers and the outgoing talent. I think all of those things may be something that the current government employees can take. Yeah, I would also say to them, keep up the great work. So I'm not trying to give them more work to do.
Well, thank you, Cailin. Thank you for joining us on the show. We really appreciate it. And good luck with your future work on these papers.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Seth.
Thank you for listening to Infrastructure Connections. Please take a moment to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment down below to let us know what your thoughts are on this episode. Or drop us a line at the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. Stay tuned for the next episode of Infrastructure Connections.